I just appreciate everybody watching.
Watch him throw the ball. We gon' pick it off. You gon' let him hit the hole or you gon' cut it off. You gon' play through fourth and long or you gon' punt it off. Your defenders heavy hitters, put your pads in. Don't be looking for the ref to throw no flags in. Keep the helmet on, keep the cleats tight. You the type to want to win by any means, right? You should look alive. This is Trap or Dive.
Welcome back to another episode of the Trap or Dive podcast, provided to you by 214 Media. I'm your host, Mual, here with another film session with the good man, a good friend of the show, Mark Bullock. Mark Bullock does his own thing now. You know, he was formerly of the Athletic, Washington Post, doing good work over there. And you all know if you've been subscribed to the Trap or Dive, you know that Mark Bullock has been doing a good job doing his own thing with his substack, breaking down film. Nothing changed, just a new area, new destination for him. But he's still doing his thing with the film breakdowns, and he is joining me today with the Sam Cosmi film session for the Washington Commanders. Mark, how you doing? I appreciate you joining me. Look, for those who don't know, like I'm a morning person, and Mark, I think Mark is understanding this. Like as we discuss this session, we're doing this at 7 a.m. on my side. I accommodated Mark this time around because he usually accommodates us. But now I wanted to return the favor to him. It's 7 a.m. on my side, man. We up early getting this work in. Mark, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah, normally these things happen at like 2 or 3 in the morning for me, as most people usually record in the evening. So it's pretty nice for it to be middle of the day. If you can see in the background, sun shining. So I'm not really used to that, but thank you very much for accommodating me for that one.
Absolutely, man. And now you know I'm a morning person, so we can get these things done out the way. Ain't no problem to me, as long as I'm teleworking. But yeah, it's all good, man. So let's go ahead and get into Sam Cosmi. And I think before we talk the player himself, I guess we can talk about the unit. Mark, I think one of the things that we have to understand as we talk about the Washington Commanders offensive line is that there's been changes. There's been turnover with this unit. Obviously, as we see, there is no more Eric Flowers. There is no more Brandon Sheriff at the left guard and right guard, respectively. And now you have somewhat of a position battle oncoming between Wes Schweitzer and Trey Turner. And, you know, we don't know how that turns out, but according to ESPN projections, we can go off this. And if you have an opinion on Trey Turner, because I know you watched him and Norwell as well, we can talk about how they fit and how you see these projections. But Mark, I think one of the things for me as we look at this lineup is just understanding first and foremost the turnover and how that kind of can affect the players themselves, like a Sam Cosmi, who is a one-year player and relied upon an all-pro offensive lineman and also a 5-time, 6-time Pro Bowler at his right guard position. And them two working together, and now he doesn't have that anymore. And I want to get your thoughts on the new look of the offensive line and some challenges that Sam Cosmi may face, but also maybe some positives that can work or how they can counter those challenges and working together and building a rapport together with this new offensive line.
Yeah, so I think the place to start with that is I think what Sheriff did for Cosmi last year was quite underrated, and it extends to Chase Rudier as well, because what the offensive line did, especially early in the season when Cosmi was having some struggles in pass protection, they would slide Sheriff out to help Cosmi as much as possible so that Cosmi could commit to, you know, trying to cut off an edge rusher, and he knew that he'd have Sheriff right there on his inside shoulder if he was getting beat inside. So Sheriff was doing a lot of, you know, really working hard to pass off any kind of three technique to his side, inside to Rudier. Rudier was doing a great job of passing anything off and picking up what Sheriff was passing off. And that allowed Sheriff to be able to get outside, and then that allowed Cosmi to, you know, have that help. So they really did a lot of work with Sheriff and Roulier to help out Cosmi, especially early on in the year. So losing Sheriff will have a negative impact on Cosmi, but hopefully, we saw at the end of last year, Cosmi improved with his technique, and didn't rely quite so much on Sheriff. And obviously, Sheriff was injured and missed some time last year, and Schweitzer stepped in and did a pretty good job. But he wasn't the same. He didn't have the same impact as a pass protector that Sheriff does. So Cosmi will still have to step up. So I think that will be the biggest thing, is that Washington will be hoping that the improved technique that he showed throughout the course of last season will continue this off season and into the start of the season, and then they don't need to rely on whoever's at right guard sliding across and helping him quite so much, because they don't have Brandon Sheriff, and depending on Chase Roulier's injury and how he recovers from that, if he's not ready in time for the season, they might not have him at the start of the year either. So you might be looking at Schweitzer at center and Turner at right guard, and that's a new group for Cosmi to work with. So I think there is a little bit of concern, but I think there's good players, and I think the benefit that Turner and Norwell have is that obviously they played in this system before. That they know Rivera and what he wants. They know John Matsko and what he's looking for, and they played their best football under Matsko and Rivera. So they should be able to adapt to the system pretty quickly, and then it's all dependent on how well they kind of gel with the group that is there, whether that's Roulier or Schweitzer at center, and obviously, as we said, Cosmi at right tackle and Charles Leno at left tackle.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned too, when you said this, was Sam Cosmi understanding that. Well, you didn't say it like this, but basically said that he's in a situation where without Sheriff and with a year under his belt, this is like a year where he has to kind of hold his own weight. And that's my interpretation of it, because that's how I felt too. But I think that with that being said, you have all this veteran experience, and I did the math when I wrote the article. So I would just say I think it was like an average of 6 years per player, whether it's Leno, Norwell, Roulier, Schweitzer, or Turner respectively, but average of 6 years career experience to Cosmi's one. You kind of have to understand, what situations he's in. But when you talk about the pass protection, I 100% agree with Brandon Sheriff having that help on his left side, meaning Cosmi's left side, and having that stable guy who knows, like, because Sheriff was there to clean up a lot of Cosmi's pass protection issues. And I think another thing is I didn't see too much exposures in this instance, but the passing off of stunts, the stunt game, the line games that they play, how do you communicate that? And also in the run game, when you do your combination blocking and trying to get to the second level, how does Wes Schweitzer make his fit as he climbs to the next level? How does he help seal Cosmi's guy off, whether it's the 3-tech or anything like that? How does he seal him off? How does he help Cosmi get in place in position to hold that block at the first level as Schweitzer climbs? And same thing with Trey Turner if he's in there. All of these different things. And I think what I'm saying when I say all these things is it sounds like the counter to losing Sheriff is two things. One, obviously practicing together and getting to know one another. But then secondly, the communication part. I guess that's what we're looking at when we talk about trying to make up the absence of a Brandon Sheriff.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we saw Schweitzer step in for Sheriff at times last year. So there's a bit of a relationship between Schweitzer and Cosmi there. So if Roullier's back and it is just a straight battle between Schweitzer and Turner at right guard, then maybe that relationship that was previously formed last year helps, because they obviously have an understanding of the communication and how each guy will try to play each technique, and where someone can help someone else. So as you were mentioning, like if it's an outside zone to the left, and will Schweitzer, punch the defensive tackle, get a strong hand on him and give Cosmi a chance to get over and reach before Schweitzer climbs up, or is Schweitzer the kind of guy that just immediately works up to the second level and Cosmi has to be real quick. And so they have a bit of a relationship already from last year. So that should help out. And Turner, you would hope the experience that Turner has, like he's played on a lot of different offensive lines now, and with a lot of different coaches and a lot of different players around him. So you would hope he would have a pretty good understanding of what it means to play with a guy playing in his second year, and how he might have to help that guy a little bit more than he would have to help certain other players. So it comes down to a lot of communication with the offensive line and an understanding of how athletic a guy next to you is, and can they afford to hold their guy a little bit to give you an extra chance to reach the block, or do they need to get out real quick and go reach a linebacker? I think that will be the key for them is building that relationship throughout training camp and understanding the little details between each guy and what works for each guy.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and get into some Sam Cosmi, man. All right, so let's go ahead and get into some pass pro with the good man Sam Cosmi and his rookie season. I guess before we get into the clips right here, what do you think of his pass protection early on in the season? Like, we don't have to actually break down these clips that I'm about to put in here right second, but I think one of the things with him, this is some clips from Bosa on third down, but I just wanted to show this early on and get your take on his pass protection early in the season, not necessarily against Bosa by himself, but just seeing that first game as we talk about Cosmi himself and some of the things that he came across against a veteran like Bosa. But what was your take on him?
Yeah, I think what we saw earlier in the year was a lot of what we saw in college out of him. Was he's obviously a very good athlete, but he kind of coasted on that athleticism in college. He didn't have the greatest technique, and a lot of his issues stemmed from he would bend at the waist, which would lead to him being off balance. He would lunge and drop his head and not see his blockers and see his rusher and not be able to like get his hands on guys with a sort of solid base and hold his position. He'd be always be off balance because he was lunging and bending from the waist, and that would let guys like Bosa, the best rushers in the league, are always going to be able to take advantage of that. So when you see a guy lunging and bending at the waist and his center of gravity moves from over his feet to way in front of his feet, then it's very, very easy for pass rushers to just swipe a hand down and pull him off balance, basically. And guys like Bosa really took advantage of that in that first game. Throughout the game, it was not a very good first game in the NFL for Cosmi, and Bosa will make a lot of young tackles look bad, but the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season for Cosmi before he got injured, we saw a fair bit of that lunging, and then as the season went on, we saw him start to, especially after he came back from his injury, we saw him start to play with a little bit better technique, a little bit more patience, staying a little bit more upright, and obviously it's tougher for a guy that's his size to play because he's so tall. He naturally wants to get lower to play with better leverage, but the way to get lower is bending in the knees rather than the waist, because that keeps your center of gravity over your feet, and then you're more balanced and you have a better base. So we saw that towards the end of the year, where he was playing with a little bit better base and a little bit more patience, letting blocks come to him instead of lunging at them. And then he made defensive ends and pass rushers actually have to work a little bit to beat him rather than just a quick move and skipping by him.
So obviously, as we all know, when we do film breakdowns, everybody who understands that it's not all bad in one moment when we talk about early in the season. He always had some good reps, but when you see the inconsistencies, you kind of start to identify some of the issues. But with that being said, we're starting off with the good here. In terms of the all pass pro clips, we wanted to show a little bit of Bosa, but let's go ahead and get back into some of the things he does well. I'll start with this first one, and then we can run it back and kind of talk about what you saw on this rep. So here we go. And then running this thing back just a little bit. Okay, so the floor is yours, and I can come in afterwards.
Yeah, so we see him a little bit more balanced. I think this is from the Giants game later in the year. Oh, it was week 2, right? So we see him a little bit more balanced. He's leaning on the guy a little bit. Obviously, he steps inside to cut off any kind of rush inside, and as we see there, we got Sheriff there ready to help him. But as the guy commits to the edge, we see him a little bit more. He's kind of a little bit leaning on him a little bit more than you'd like, but because the guy's committed outside and he's got Sheriff inside to help him, he doesn't have to worry about that quite so much. He gets that outside arm to the chest, which can be a little bit dangerous, but he gets it just on the outside pec rather than right down the middle, and that keeps him engaged and stops the defender from just swiping the arm away. And then he can use his size to kind of lean on him and prevent him from turning the corner and hold him off.
Yeah. One of these things, like you mentioned, and we'll get into it when we talk about some of the issues that he has, but I think the issue that he had right here now, the good thing is that he's going up against Dexter Lawrence, right, Mark? And I love Dexter Lawrence, but Dexter Lawrence is a powerful guy. He's not like a person who's going to beat you with speed. He's going to beat you with power. And for Dexter Lawrence to be playing up on the head of the tackle, playing the 4 technique, you're not necessarily threatened by any inside moves. But in that same vein, Sam Cosmi, his right leg, you kind of see him immediately turn in and give him that lane towards the around the arc. Like he's giving up that what did Logan Paulson called it, the short edge. Like he's giving a short edge in a sense where if this was a speed rusher, Mark, or somebody with a little bit more speed, he'll be able to get around Cosmi because he's giving up that short edge. And with Heineke taking this drop, that's what can ultimately compromise Sam Cosmi. But what helps is his use of hands, and that's what you brought up. The fact that he's able to put his hands in a good placement, but also have the strength to control and also defeat the the rip move, trying to get under Cosmi's helm or shoulder pads and get around him in that sense. But when you're dealing with a power rusher like Dexter Lawrence, you don't really have to worry about much except for hold your ground, and that's kind of what he did there.
Yeah, and I think if you pause it just as he's getting to the edge and he's turning around the corner, just there, you can kind of see he's leaning just a little bit, kind of leaning on him. And that works because, as we said, Lawrence is a kind of power rusher and he's not going to really threaten the edge for speed. But you can see the other side. If you look at Charles Leno on the other side, Leno's has a lot better technique. He's reaching with his arms, but he's not lunging at the guy. Whereas if you see Cosmi, his back he's kind of leaning at the guy, his back's at an angle, whereas Leno's a little bit more upright and back in his stance and bending from the knees. So I think that's where the technique is very different. You see a lot better, more polished technique from Leno on the left side, whereas you see Cosmi leaning a lot more on the right.
So yeah, that footwork is important when you can slide like that without having to cross your feet. That's something we didn't bring up with the Chargers game. He crossed his feet plenty of times, and with your first game like that in the pros too, I don't criticize, and they did every right. They had every right to put Bosa on Cosmi, especially on third down. I think they did like 6 or 7 times. It's what you're supposed to do. You're trying to win. But when you see what Leno is doing, as you brilliantly pointed out, you see somebody with much cleaner footwork, being able to slide, take his 45-degree, and meet his defender out there and control him in that sense. It's a perfect example of what you should do in the same exact play. All right. Now here we go. Second play. Now this was a much more. Now you go this one. Here you go.
Yeah, so we see him a little bit more patient there, and I think that was a much bigger point of emphasis for him as the year went on, where he's not lunging at the guy, he's waiting for the rusher to get to him before engaging, and that allows him to stay a little bit more upright, keep his center of gravity over his feet, and then the rusher has to work an actual move to beat him rather than just skip by him by him being off balance. So that's a much better example. Kind of it gets a little bit rough around the edges towards the end of the rep, but it's more than enough for Heineke to get the ball out. It's obviously a quick drop and a quick release. So all he has to really do is cut off that speed to the edge, and he does that because he has the athletic ability to get out there.
Absolutely. I like this one too. One of the things that stands out with Cosmi, while his footwork is inconsistent, I think the flashes that I loved out of him was that his athletic ability, like his foot quickness, is impressive at times. Like he shows that he can do it, but I think once he gets his base right, he understands, or he can get a base consistent and understands how to move his feet laterally and pass pro without staggering or stumbling. It can look like that when he's facing these pass rushers. Like I think this is Josh Sweat, I believe, 94. Yeah, Josh Sweat of the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'll give the floor to you. But starting from his stance in itself, taking that 45-degree out there to meet Josh and kind of, I say he won it. I say he won the half, man. But I'll give the floor to you, and we could talk about what you saw from here.
Yeah, he definitely, and as you mentioned, the foot speed, he gets out there early enough to let himself set up and cut off that speed rush, and then make the guy work for a different kind of hand pattern. And I think another strength of Cosmi's is that he does have some good hands. You can see him fighting with the hands there, and kind of swipes away the first hand and is able to get the guy into him where he can control him with his hands, because Cosmi's arm length isn't the longest for a guy his size, so he needs to let guys get into him where he can reach them and get his hands on them. So and I think when he gets his hands right, he's actually very good. He has some real advanced hand techniques, but it's something that he's got to get his hands on guys, and he needs to be patient and let guys come to him, because as you said, he has the foot speed to get out and cut off speed rushers. He just needs to be patient and let blocks come to him, and then once he engages, show off how good his hands can be.
Speaking of hand usage, that's what I was about to bring up. This one, as what you said, like as we're pausing it right here, you kind of see that long arm from 51. I've been saying his name all week and all of a sudden forgot, so I don't remember what his name was. But 51 I think he's a rookie as well for the New York Giants, or he was a rookie last year. He has that long arm in Cosmi's chest right now. But I think to your point, when you talk about hand usage, the violence of his right hand being able to thwart 51 in that same rush, every single time he strikes him, he's stopping him on that arc around toward the quarterback. It's something that you're speaking of when you're talking about his hand usage, his placements, but it's also his strike, his strength in his strike. So I'll rewind this and you can take the floor from here.
Yeah, when he lands that strike and then the defensive end extends his arm to kind of long arm, and you can see Cosmi come back with his arm, and kind of his inside arm rips down to push the arm off his chest. He does a really good job with his inside hand and his outside hand, kind of clearing that long arm and making and bringing the guy closer to him, pulling him off balance a little bit, making him rethink his rush. And he's very good at those subtle little pulls of an arm or clips to get the hands of the defender clear of him and make the defender go to plan B and plan C. So it's when he's more patient like this that he's able to show off how good his hand usage can be. And that one right there that you just showed is really good. You can see how how his left arm kind of pulls down on the guy's inside arm, and he's able to pull him off balance because he's trying to set up for that long arm rush, which Cosmi is weak against in theory because he has shorter arms. But when you can counter it with this kind of technique, as soon as a guy goes for a long arm rush, obviously they're leaning on you. So if you can pull that hand down and get it off your chest, then they're going to be completely off balance, and you're able to bring them down to the ground here, or almost down to the ground, and catch them like he did there. So I think that's where Cosmi is really good, is when he can when he stays patient and he plays with more balance rather than lunging at guys and bending from the waist. When he can use his athleticism to cut off the speed rushes and let blocks come to him, then he can show off those hand movements and the hand fighting to keep guys off of him and pull them off balance rather than him being pulled off balance.
Now, I'm glad you finished it the way you did, because this rep right here is a win and a loss for Cosmi. And I wanted to make sure that the people saw all aspects of an offensive lineman's game, because the name of the game isn't always how you start, it's how you finish too. Like it's multiple facets in a rush in any facet of the game. When you're a receiver, whether you're an offensive lineman, anything when it comes to skill positions or in the trenches, like you're not always going to win every phase of that rep. And I think with Cosmi right here, when we'll show it, you'll kind of see what he does initially at the snap, and then how he ultimately ends up winning and saving his quarterback in pass protection.
Yeah, so that one, he's working inside on a play action pass. So he's working inside on the defensive tackle, and he gets, he lunges a little bit. He gets the defensive tackle comes off the ball well, stays low, gets his hands inside, and begins to drive Cosmi back. But Cosmi manages to, get his feet. He nearly trips over Sheriff there, or whoever it is. Yeah, it's Sheriff. He nearly trips over him, but he manages to get his feet back underneath him, and give himself a bit of a base and absorb that power rush from the defensive tackle. And once that's absorbed, you can see how he kind of flips his hands on him, and he's able to kind of pull the defender's leaning on him, so he's able to kind of pull his hands from underneath him, and that stops the defender from being able to lean on him, which obviously knocks him off balance, and then Cosmi's able to win the rep by falling on top of him.
It's this moment right here, like the subtlety of the game. And if you notice, for those who are listening and watching, you notice the quick switch right here, just him using his momentum. Like you mentioned, he was leaning, Cosmi being able to use his momentum, meaning 99's momentum against him, and bring him down to the ground right there in that instant, is kind of where Cosmi finds himself. Once he settles down with his base and establishes ground, he's able to flip and put him into the ground himself and save himself from getting sent into the quarterback. So that's a good thing for the good man Cosmi right there. All right, and as we get into some of the issues with Cosmi on the last leg of Pass Pro, I'll let this one play and we can run it back and talk about some instances, because this one, as we're talking about, it's a sequence of 2 plays, and we'll run them back to back, and you'll see that these 2 plays actually happen within a week of one another. So I think it was kind of a film session or a film study from DeMarcus Lawrence of the Cowboys, and you kind of can see the flaws and or something that Cosmi is acceptable to, that Mark actually brought up in the beginning of our film session. So we'll go ahead and run this back, or run it and then run it back. As you saw, 77 gave him some help at the end, but we'll go ahead and run this back and you can break down what you're seeing. All right, here we go.
Yeah, so he's trying to get outside and cut the guy off, but he doesn't quite get there. I think he's a little bit wary of McKissick coming out of the backfield. I think he knows that McKissick's probably meant to chip here, so he's playing a little bit more inside than he probably normally would. And then McKissick kind of doesn't give him anything with the
Gibson.
chip. Is it Gibson? Sorry, yeah, I don't want to.
But listen, but it's funny because I remember we had our conversation, Mark, when we were talking about Brian Robinson online, and I had mentioned that Brian does take some body shots, like and you were mentioning the conversation of willingness versus actual competitiveness and people who are trying to actually make an impact in pass protection. I'm sorry, man, but I've seen this a couple times out of Antonio Gibson when I was watching Sam Cosmi, and this is actually him attempting to make a block on a defender, and you see this too often. I don't understand what purpose is he serving, but I know the running back coach Randy Jordan has an issue with this one. But I'll get the floor back to you. I just wanted to bring up that conversation because Antonio Gibson is very disappointing watching him try to pass protect and chip that edge rusher.
Yeah, 100%. The conversation we had was about there's a difference between willingness and technique, and Brian Robinson was really good, was really willing, but didn't have the best technique. He often dived at guys' legs and tried to cut them and stuff. Gibson doesn't do either here. He doesn't really show much willingness to make a block, and the technique's pretty terrible as well, which kind of, sets up Cosmi to fail. So it's tough because when you're expecting that help on the outside, you kind of play a little bit more inside, as we saw there. Because we've seen in the previous clips how Cosmi's had the foot quickness to cut off guys on the edge and get out there. But there you kind of see him play a little bit more inside, expecting to have that help, and he didn't get it.
Now here, like I mentioned with the film study, a week later, Sam Cosmi takes on the Dallas Cowboys, and number 90 for the Dallas Cowboys saw something last week, tried to run it, didn't get the sack, but he got to the quarterback essentially. Let's go ahead and run this back and kind of break down this time what he wasn't able to do in isolated pass protection against number 90. Matter of fact, hold on, let's actually start at the snap. So at the snap, what type of pass pro is he taking? He is taking a quick 45 angle towards Lawrence. Is that Lawrence or Gregory? I keep forgetting.
90 is
number
Lawrence,
90?
isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. 94 is Gregory, I think.
Got you. Oh yeah, so 90 Lawrence, and he's able to meet him quickly again with the foot quickness. He's out there, but now at this point is where he starts running into the issues. And you mentioned lunging already with his head down, and you got it.
Exactly. We see that lunging. You can see right there that he's bending from the waist rather than the knees, and he drops his head. So he's not really seeing anything. Yeah, that's a horrible position to be in when your head's basically level with your hips at that point. Like, he's definitely lunging, and that's his center of gravity is just completely pulled over his body, and it's very easy for good rushers like Lawrence and whoever in the league can very easily use a quick club and swim or a rip to pull a guy off balance and skip by them. So that is the kind of primary issue for him is to play with better technique. And I think towards the end of the year, we saw it come into his game. So that is the hopeful that it will improve. But he does have to, it has to be a point of emphasis for him to be more patient, to not lunge at guys, and to bend from the knees rather than the waist.
Now this one, when we speak of the footwork and technique, sometimes again his footwork isn't always the cleanest, and I think obviously for any offensive lineman that's what you always want to work on. But when you see something like this, and I'll rewind it back for those who didn't just see that instance of that stagger when he came out of his stance, taking this vertical drop this time for the pass protection. So vertical, for those who don't know, vertical is more of a linear, and you have your 45, so more at a 45-degree angle in a literal sense. So that's kind of what you see when you hear vertical and 45s. This one he's taking more towards a depth towards the quarterback, but this one is right there, that left leg. Look at that left leg at the top. It's kind of where he ends up staggering, and at 51, I think the ball came out actually quicker. Let me see. Yeah, the ball came out quicker. So it saved Cosmi. Let's go ahead and run this back in. Let me know what you're seeing on this one, Mark.
Yeah, you're right. The drop is a little bit. The feet are a little bit out of sync, and he kind of gets himself into an awkward position where he's almost leaning back on his heels rather than being forward, and that leads the defensive end to kind of transition from speed to try to power rush him, and you can see he's starting to get knocked back, and then Cosmi gets his base underneath him as the ball's coming out. But it's footwork that if it was a longer drop would cause the quarterback a lot of issues, and you could kind of argue it probably did there. Heineke probably felt it and had to rush to get that ball out. So.
All right, and I think this is the last one. one of the issues in pass protection. I'll go ahead and play it, and we can run it back. The floor is yours.
Yeah, right at the end, you see him drop that head again, and he kind of opens up and lets the guy get that edge. You'd like to see him make sure he cuts off that rush to the edge a little bit more. I think he's a little bit more wary of, Sheriff's not going to be there at that point. As we mentioned earlier, that Sheriff was helping a lot, and was able to protect his inside. So Cosmi was a lot more aggressive in getting outside and cutting off the rush to the edge. Whereas here, Sheriff obviously has a guy covered on him, and he knows from the protection call that Rudy is sliding the other way. So he's not going to have that help. So he's a little bit less aggressive off the snap, getting outside. He's a little bit more conservative. He only takes kind of a half shuffle step or something like that rather than a full drop. And obviously the guy engages pretty quickly, but he's then, we see he's quite wide with his base there, and we see him starting to bend from the waist again and kind of lunge again. And the guy's able to get his hands inside on the chest of Cosmi. And from that point, he's kind of, the defender's in control of the block.
And that's why I paused here, Mark, because for those who are watching, obviously see where I think this is 51, where his hands are compared to where Cosmi's hands are. Cosmi doesn't even have a hand. He doesn't even have his right hand on 51. Like it's not there. He has no contact, no placement right now because of how quickly 51 was able to engage with 76, but also the placement and being able to knock his arms off him. And now with that initial strike from 51, you're seeing I have to re-engage. But even still right here, and shout out to Thursday Night Football's field cameras that's cutting off this this vision right here. But try to look through the camera. You see where 51 is engaged again with both hands inside 76's shoulder pads. And that's kind of where you see some of the issues with the length, Mark, that you talked about. And for those who are watching again, remember he talked about Cosmi's length. You're going to have these type of issues. And for Cosmi, while I think that when engaged on occasions his use of hands are good, he has to have a plan to defeat these long arms. He has to have these type of plans and understand how to defeat it. And again, this is week 2, but you kind of want to see like this type of stuff that he works on in the off season. Because when you don't have that arm length, Mark, it's something that you have to either be quick and strong with your strikes, or you have to find a way to keep yourself clean at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think over the course of the season, I wrote a piece a few weeks ago, a month ago now, where I compared his week 2 game against the Giants compared to his week 16 game against the Giants, and you saw a pretty significant improvement in general. We saw obviously the lunging that we've been talking about, but he also played with wide and low hands. They were kind of separate. They weren't in a position ready to strike quite a lot in week 2, whereas towards the end of the season in like week 16, we saw he'd be in a lot better position. Obviously, he'd be a lot more patient. He'd be a little bit more upright, less lungy, but we also saw those hands kind of together and ready to strike, not necessarily striking together at the same time, but close to his chest, ready to protect himself and ready to use either a 1 or 2 hand punch to strike. And as you say, land those early punches and be patient and let blocks come to him so that then he can reach the guy. And kind of as we saw earlier where he dealt with that one long arm rush, we saw some of those different hand techniques where you can kind of clear a guy's arm once they start leaning on you for those long arms. And he shows the ability to do that, but he's got to get himself fundamentally in a position ready to deal with that. And early in the season, certainly he did not do that often.
Man, where's Trent Williams when you need it? Like that's all you need to do is talk to Trent. Figure this thing out. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to this run game. I'll run this one back. Now, there's several things for those who are watching and listening. I say this all the time, but there are several instances in which a game is important. It's not just how does he match up in one-on-one situations. Washington runs a variety, or it's really just 2, but they run zone concepts and they run gap power concepts. And I think there's a variety of blocks that you have to understand. You have to understand the reach blocks that Mark mentioned. You have to understand the base blocks, the one-on-one Can he drive his defender off the ball? Can he take him where he doesn't want to go? Like, does he have the placement? Does he have the hand strength to control and lock his defenders? How is he on the second level? How's his athleticism in space? All of these things. How's his awareness when he's lining up against 3 techniques and 5 techniques? Does he understand his assignments? It's a variety of things that all culminates in how they perform at the position in the run game and even the pass game to an extent. And these are some things that we're going to cover right now when we talk about the run game. And I'll go ahead and run this one play mark, and we will run it back afterwards. I believe I started with the second level clips for Cosmi, but let's go ahead and find out. Yes.
Yeah, this was the trap scheme where he gets a little bit lost. So they're running a trap scheme where the 3 technique between Sheriff and Cosmi, they both kind of fake blocking him, and then they both escape to the second level and let left guard Eric Flowers come and trap him. And Cosmi does initially a pretty good job. He gets up to the second level pretty nicely, and he even looks at 48, who's his target, but then sees that he's got his receiver. Who is that? I think that's De'Ami Brown coming in.
Yes.
Yeah. He sees receiver there, and I don't know why you'd leave a linebacker to a receiver, but if he sees him, he thinks, okay, well, I'll work one down and go to 54. But Sheriff's already got 54 accounted for, so that kind of leaves him in no man's land, and he's kind of just in the way at this point. Now he does, identify that his guy was actually 48 on the outside, and he gets back outside, but he did kind of impede where the back was trying to go and get in his way a little bit.
I think, yeah, and to a degree, I think one of the things when you look at instances like this, like you explained the context well with De'Ami being there and 75 being where he was. I think one of the things that he's also taking into account, as if you look at the head movement, is the fact that 48, as Cosmi is climbing, 48 moves out of his way, and
yeah.
48 moves out of his way, and he sees that 54 is blocked. Now he's looking for opportunity. And yep. I think that's the other part is the opportunity. How do you feel in space? Like, there are some people who look completely lost and don't even know who to block. And he's just continuously looking for that opportunity. And that's when you turn around and you see a 48 pursuing Antonio Gibson. And I don't know, like, I ran this thing back 1,000 times, Mark. I don't know how many yards he actually gains if Cosmi doesn't ultimately block 48 for the backside pursuit. I'll leave that to you. What do you think about that one? Just understanding the situation, I guess in my lens.
Yeah, I think the key is that, like, he does come back and block 48 in the end. I think the key is that because he goes back for 54 and then goes back outside, you can see he's kind of in the way of Gibson. I think it's Gibson running through the hole.
Yeah.
And so he kind of stops Gibson and forces him to kind of slow down a little bit and stop him from accelerating. You can see there he's kind of got his backside in the way of Gibson's hip, and so Gibson has to get skinny rather than just exploding through the hole. And so that potentially prevents Gibson from running away from guys. But
if he climbed and he ultimately blocks 23, maybe. Do you think that's probably
something? I don't know exactly where he feels like he should have been. I think from going back outside the 48, I think you're right. He keeps his head on a swivel. He keeps looking for opportunities to block someone, and in the end he blocks the guy I think he should have blocked. But I think because he had that little bit of hesitation, mm-hmm. where he was like, okay, well, De'Ami Brown's got him. I'll go back down the line. And then realizes that there's nobody there for him to block. He should have blocked the linebacker. Then I think if he had just stuck on the linebacker, then that could have potentially been I think it was still a good run. They still picked up a good decent amount of yards on it, but I think it could have been a potentially more explosive run had he.
Maybe the inverse than what I was saying. Maybe if 76 blocks 48 initially, De'Ami climbs and gets 23, or maybe even who came in at the last second, who was at 22.
Yeah, you'd think the receiver typically is trying to block a DB rather than a linebacker. So you'd rather have an offensive lineman on a linebacker. I think that's probably how you would want it to play out in an ideal situation. But you're right in that 48 steps outside, so it makes it kind of a confusing read for him, because he's expecting to block down and see a guy kind of come towards him, because it's designed to look a bit like power. So he's expecting a guy to be coming towards him, and the fact that the guy goes outside makes it a little bit confusing for him.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and run this one. Here we go.
Yeah, this is jet sweep, isn't it? Yeah, so
Yep, just sweep. And this is also somewhat of what we talked about before we even started watching the film, the combo block between Sheriff and Cosmi, having that understanding and seeing Cosmi quickly climb up to that second level. But the floor is yours, and seeing what you see here.
yeah, I think this is what Cosmi does really well. I think this is what we saw him do really well throughout the year, where when he comes off the snap, he's able to block down on the defensive tackle, helps Sheriff secure it, and obviously he gets a good punch on the guy there because Sheriff's able to fall on top of him and take him out of play completely. And then we see him climb, and he climbs pretty quickly, and he gets to the guy, and he gets to his linebacker, and he engages with him. And it's tough for an offensive lineman to stay engaged with a linebacker in space because linebackers are obviously more athletic. And what we see Cosmi trying to do is trying to force the guy outside. And it's tough because he there's no way of Cosmi knowing where the runner is. Yeah. So he doesn't know where he's trying to cut back. So he's just trying to stay in front of his guy and as much as possible. And I think he does a pretty good job. If those receivers, or was that Logan Paul? No, not Logan Paulson. Logan Thomas.
Logan Thomas. Yep.
Yeah. Logan, if it had been Logan Paulson, this is probably a big run, but Logan Thomas
Yeah.
blocking it. If Thomas had a little bit of a better block, then that probably turns into a big play. But because Thomas can't quite get in front of his guy, and the receiver has to cut his run back a little bit early, then Cosmi's block is a little bit more emphasized, and the linebacker is able to cut back inside.
And I think, and I ain't no insider man, but I think this small clip that we're playing right here, like that part right there, is something that you speak on when it comes to offensive linemen, their athleticism, but also being able to maneuver on the second and third levels, and even in the screen game too, is that short instance of acceleration, being able to keep up with that linebacker and mirror him wherever he's going, is something that you're not going to see from your average. Let me not over exaggerate. You're not going to see that from most. You're not going to see that from most people in terms of the athleticism and foot speed to keep up with that linebacker for that short area. And if Washington can decide and find ways to use him on that second level mark and that third level, or even on the screen game on his side, so long as he understands his assignments initially and can execute in that sense, you have an opportunity on the right side of the ball to be successful in space.
Yeah, and it kind of mirrors a lot of what Sheriff gave them in that Sheriff was a very athletic guard, and he could make the strong down block like we just saw from Cosmi, but then have the athletic ability to get out in space and block a guy, and that offers you a lot of flexibility in the run game to do a lot of different things. And we saw there, Cosmi was able to down block the defensive tackle and then get out and reach a linebacker in space. That's an incredible asset to have in a running game. If they can harness that ability, then that's a really big trait to have.
Absolutely. All right, so next up, we'll go ahead and get into another series of blocks, double teams, combos, and right here, I'll run it for you, and we can run it back afterwards. And then he finishes. I love it. I love it.
That was excellent. That Falcons game was one of the first ones that I remember seeing Cosmi in the run game, thinking this guy can be an asset for them, because there's that late shift, which adjusts the position. So instead of just blocking straight to the linebacker, he's now got a guy in his gap, so he needs to combo block with Sheriff, and he needs to take the majority of that block and get it back towards Sheriff, and you see that power that he comes off the ball with, and lets Sheriff secure the defensive tackle. And then they naturally block the guy up to the linebacker. That's kind of textbook how you want it. And then he peels off at the last second, picks up that linebacker. He's able to change direction with the linebacker. And as you say, finish was fantastic. He's able to stay engaged and play beyond the whistle and really show that kind of nasty streak that you want from offensive linemen.
Yeah, I love it. Same thing here with another combo. This time I think he's the seal man on that one, so he's not climbing. That's
Yeah,
hitting
that
for
one.
75. Yeah, Brandon is
Yeah, so
climbing on this one.
this is the zone play where he's working the combination with Sheriff, but a lot of teams teach zone differently, where um, Sheriff would immediately climb up to the linebacker, and Cosmi would just have to reach that defensive tackle. But because the way they teach it is Sheriff stays there a little bit longer and is able to kind of punch that guy and really get on him and engage, and then let Cosmi step right in behind him and almost just take on the block straight as soon as he's ready, and then Sheriff's able to peel off. So that's a really good combination of those guys, and that's something that um, we'll see whether Cosmi this year is able to just reach that guy and take him on his own, and allow, if it's Schweitzer or if it's Turner, to take on the block, to get up to the second level straight away, or whether he still needs that strong presence from that he had from Sheriff here, to secure the block before Cosmi's able to take it over. I think that kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier, whether the loss of Sheriff. Sorry, go on.
No, you're good. I was gonna say, let me ask you this now, because we are about to wrap up shortly. When we talk about Turner and Schweitzer, who do you think, just in terms of being able to work in the run fits, who do you think works well? And you don't have to have like 100% accurate opinion, but just based on what you saw, based on what you watched between Turner and Schweitzer, because I haven't seen any of Turner yet, or Norwell for that matter. But who do you think works well in the run game with what Cosmi's able to do on the outside?
Yeah, I think in terms of the run game, I think Schweitzer offers a little bit more than Turner. Schweitzer's a little bit more athletic, and the reliance on zone Washington had last year, Schweitzer was fantastic in the run game, and so that relationship that they have, and Schweitzer kind of playing both guards and center spots at times last year, he was fantastic, and so if we're talking just from a run game perspective, I think Schweitzer would have the leg up for me, but from a pass pro perspective, I'd probably lean a little bit more on Turner. So I think there's going to be a decision to make there. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how that plays out. I think, I think I'd give a significant edge in the run game to Schweitzer because he's more athletic, but Turner does have an edge in pass protection.
Okay. All right, a couple more on this side. He has a play side block in his own run, and we'll see. I should have let it run it all the way through because that was a big play. Being able to
that was a nice long run, and so on these outside zones or wide zones, ideally you'd like to see him get a little bit more movement on the defensive end, but he does a decent enough job. He gets a good initial position. He's low. He's underneath the guy. He's got his hands inside, but then the defender is able to kind of adjust. And the key for him is to not let the edge defender prevent the run from basically prevent the running back from running his path. The running back's aiming point from the snap is either the outside foot of the tackle or usually what would be the inside foot of a ghost tight end. So if you imagine an extra tight end there, that would be the running back's aiming point. And so as long as that defensive end isn't straight away standing him up, then the running back's able to take his path the way he wants to. And from there, he's able to just kind of hold that edge defender outside and allow the back to cut up inside.
All right, somewhat same instance here. This one is, again, we watched zone in the previous play. This one is more of a power. You see him being able to get his guy out of that gap.
Yeah, and that's really good torque. It's a tough. That one's a tough front because the Cowboys have so many different guys standing up. They've got everyone on the line of scrimmage, and they've got linebackers and defensive ends, and you've got guys like Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and Randy Gregory all standing up and moving around. So that's a tough front for them to identify. But I think you see him do a really good job of initially cutting off the inside rush, and then he steps across, cuts off that inside rush, and then he gets that outside hand under the armpit of the defender, and that allows him to torque his body and twist the guy inside which gives the back the path to the edge. He nearly loses it at the end, but he does just enough to, hold the guy off and give his back that path.
It's that refit when you
Yep.
refitting your hands, and I think that's the part that people don't understand or maybe don't take into account when it comes to blocking. And I mean, obviously on the surface level, but it's always a continuous hand fighting. It's always hand battles. Like Aaron Donald, I remember watching a film session on Aaron Donald with one of his prior coaches that used to coach him, and like their fits, Mark, like when he talks about having, he has secondary moves, he has third, I don't know the word for third,
Tertiary.
Yeah, you know better than me. Yeah, all that stuff. He got second, third, fourth. He has all these moves in his back pocket because he knows that the battle does not stop. And while he doesn't win every rep, he understands that when he's studying against an offensive lineman, and then the same thing would be for an offensive lineman studying against a defensive lineman, you have to understand that if you're going up against a good player, they have hand moves. And you have to understand what it takes to stop that particular opponent.
Yeah, you gotta have a plan A, you gotta have a plan B, you gotta have a plan C, and you gotta know what each defender is going to come at you with. You can't go into a game blind. You have to study the film beforehand and know, exactly what they're going to go with, and their different moves and what they like to use in different situations. So, it's a lot of a mental battle.
Absolutely. So this is we got this one and then one more after this, but another zone concept. This is backside of the zone.
Backside zone. Yep. And he does a really nice job of reaching across. This time he doesn't have Sheriff with him to seal off that defensive tackle. He's got to reach him himself, and he does a nice job reaching that, and then extending his arm. He gets his outside arm under the armpit of the guy, just on his pec a little bit, and that allows him to keep the movement and give his running back a two-way go. So that was a really nice block on the backside of the zone.
So actually, two quick plays. This one is obviously Bosa again. When we talked about some of the issues that he had against Bosa, but obviously you have a wider guy. What is this? I guess this would be a 5 tech because it's not really a true edge rusher, but I guess, or 5 or 6 tech, I guess. But trying to get a base block on him and doesn't work out well for him. Again, that lunge part with his head down, completely whiffs.
Yeah, I think at that point in the game he was kind of just panicking that he's working against Bosa. It's a bit of an unbalanced line as well, so they brought Charles Leno over from the left side to right tackle, and Cosmi was even further outside than he normally would be. So I think he was panicking a little bit and reverted to, as we talked about, lunging, bending from the waist and dropping his head, and Bosa is able to skip by him.
Now, the last thing that we have, one of the issues that I saw pop up, now he's really good in the run game, but when it comes to like base blocks or anything in power, now reaching is one thing. Like you saw him reach against 97, did it well. He's able to move laterally. He's able to maintain that space between him and the defender, but also create a lane for the running back on the backside plays. But when you go up against power in the one-on-one situations, this is one of the instances that I've seen doesn't really work out well for him. And obviously he had help, but in the one-on-one situation before, who was that? Logan? Yeah, before Logan comes in and helps him, you see him get driven off the ball and would have been driven backwards even a little bit further than that if it wasn't for the help. So I want to see your opinion on his ability versus the power defensive lineman, the bigger defensive lineman, and how he fares up in those base situations, those one-on-one situations against power defensive linemen.
Yeah, I think the thing is here is I think this was a short yardage situation, right?
Yes, yes.
So he's got a very big defensive tackle on his inside shoulder, whereas the guy would normally be kind of half a gap over, so he'd be on the outside shoulder of the guard, and then he would work the combination with the guard. So instead here, he's as you say, basically one-on-one until Logan Thomas gets across to help him, and so it's a tougher block for him to reach. He does get in position to reach him, but because he's trying to reach and get low and get under him, he's got kind of a wide base, and the defender is able to kind of explode up into him. And we see the kind of issues that we talked about in pass protection, with his hands a little bit wide and his chest a bit exposed, and the defender is able to use his power to kind of blow him off the ball a bit.
Yeah, and then something similar right here, not necessarily blowing him off the ball, but having the strength to control him in those one-on-one situations. Again, Dexter Lawrence, he's a really good player, but given that Sam Cosmi only played 7 games, we're going to see a lot of Dexter Lawrence in these film clips in situations like this. So, yes, power is a issue just in one-on-one situations. If you can move laterally against power, it can work out in your favor and things like that. But this one is a little different. Okay, that wraps up the film session for Sam Cosmi, the second-year player. And Mark, let's get a conclusion on this and wrap it up. So when we talk about Sam Cosmi, his strengths and weaknesses, when you talk about the player side, what do you think that he's coming into year 2 that he does really well? And then what are some things that you think this offseason he was probably working on with some coaches and personal trainers to become better at?
Yeah, so I think his general run game ability in the run game is pretty good. I think we talked about how much of an asset he can be because of his athletic ability, and he brings some strength when he works those combination blocks. He can help his teammates secure inside, and then he has the athletic ability to climb and reach guys on the second level, and that is a huge strength that allows them to do a lot of different things in the run game, and they were going to lose a lot of that with losing Sheriff. So hopefully it's not a like-for-like replacement because obviously Cosmi's playing tackle rather than guard, and he doesn't quite have the same power that Sheriff has, certainly not at this point in his career. Once he's in the NFL and you know, on an NFL weight scheme for a little bit longer and builds up a little bit more muscle mass, then he'll probably have that strength. I think his ability in the run game is a real positive. That athleticism is a real positive. I think in pass protection, we saw him improve over the course of the year, where the start of the year, it was quite ugly, to be totally honest with you. It was, he really struggled with, as we talked about, with his balance, being lunging at guys, dropping his head, bending from the waist, and the better rushers in the league will beat that 9 times out of 10. So as the year went on, we did see him progress. And as you say, he only played something like 7 or 8 games due to injury or whatever it was. So that is something to hold on to, is that he did show progress even in such a short amount of time, and especially developing during a season. And then towards the end of the year, we saw him be a lot more patient, keep his weight over his feet. We saw his hands be a little bit closer together, and then he allowed blocks to come to him, and that's when he could show off his ability with his hand fighting and showing some different advanced moves where he could get long arm rushers where he should in theory be weak against long arm rushers, but he was able to, clear those hands and pull those guys off balance and kind of win those blocks when he in theory should be losing them. So you hope going into year 2, he continues to work on his fundamental technique of staying balanced, not lunging at guys, bending from the knees rather than the waist, and then develop those hand fighting techniques and knowing, having a plan A, but also a plan B and a plan C to help him combat those long arm rushes and making sure that he doesn't have to rely on the right guard always being there because Brandon Sheriff's not there anymore, and that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of positives to work with, and you'd hope with another off season his technique would improve and show a little bit more consistency with it, and hopefully he shows a similar jump from the start of year 1 to year 2 to the start of year 2 to the end of year 2. We'll hopefully see that same jump, and Washington will have a real good player on their hands.
We will see. I think to piggyback without taking too much of our time is understanding that it's important to marry the upper and pass protection. I mean, even still run blocking too, but it's important to marry that upper body with the lower body. Once you can maneuver and understand that you're not forgetting one thing on one rep, like, oh shoot, I forgot to move my feet. My hands are working, but my feet aren't moving.
Yep.
Or oh shoot, my feet are moving now, but he was able to get inside my chest with his hands, and now I'm driven off the ball. I think the marriage with the upper body and the lower body will work out well, and I think that's just more so something coaching, drilling it into his head, and if he's as promising as a player as we would like him to believe, I think that this is a good all season for him to really drill that down and become a better pass protector, and more consistent pass protector, and understanding what works for him, and things like that. So with that being said, Mark, let the people know where they can find you, on Twitter, on your socials, and obviously the work that you do with Substack. I know you're taking a break right now and enjoying it, man. I'm in the same boat. This the first thing I did in like a couple weeks, but look, we're right around the corner with training camp, so you better soak it in until then.
I am on a bit of a break at the moment. I've had a couple of weeks off, and I'll probably start up again next week before training camp. My Twitter's at Mark Bullock NFL. My Substack is markbullock.substack.com, and you can subscribe over there and get more breakdowns, kind of like these. And I tend to do them 3 or 4 times a week during the season, and 2 or 3 times a week outside of the season. And obviously the season's coming up, so we'll have some exciting stuff to talk about, hopefully during training camp.
Absolutely. Y'all heard the man, Mark Bullock. Go find him, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. This is the end of the Sam Cosmi film session. Until next time, y'all be safe, take it easy, all that good stuff. Peace.
Down, set, watch him throw the ball. We gon' pick it off. You gon' let him hit the hole or you gon' cut it off. You gon' play through 4th and long or you gon' punt it off. Your defenders, heavy hitters, put your pads in. Don't be looking for the ref to throw no flags in. Keep the helmet on, keep the cleats tight. You the type to want to win by any means, right? You should look alive. This is Trap or Dive.